What's up, Louis? It's Guys here. Hope you're doing great. In today's video, I'm gonna do a unbiased comparison video of property in Cape Town and compare it to the property that we can get or buy in Bloemfontein. So I'll be jumping onto my computer and we'll have a look at what the property market in Cape Town has to offer. I'm not sure if you are aware of this, but people love Cape Town property. People from all over the world buy property in Cape Town because for foreign buyers it's still relatively cheap compared to property in other areas. But of course, for majority people living in South Africa, property in Cape Town is quite expensive. What you pay for what you get isn't necessarily the best value, especially in the higher end areas in Cape Town. And I wanted to do some research and check for myself, what is it that you can get or what is it that you can buy for a certain amount in Cape Town? And is it really worth investing your hard-earned money in the Cape Town property market? Of course, the price range will be different for each and every individual, because for some people a 10 million rand property in Cape Town is cheap, and of course for other people it might be unrealistically expensive. So the idea of this video is simply to compare and to just see what is happening in the Cape Town market. Whether it's really worth the hype, because there's definitely a lot of hype going on in the property market. So with that said, we'll have a look together at what the market actually has to offer. I think it's quite interesting to look at these things because obviously, like, I invest in Bloemfontein, I live in Bloemfontein, and I understand Bloemfontein, but it's worth considering expanding your portfolio and buying property in different cities. So the first thing I wanted to do is to simply search for property in Cape Town and change the price from highest to low. So I want to see the most expensive properties first. And off the bat, we can see the type of properties that's being sold. 200 million rand for vacant land. 195 million rand for this property is technically the most expensive one being sold currently, or that's listed on Property 24. And of course, we can see why this property is so expensive. It's prime real estate. It's ideally located. Just based off the photos, it makes sense why someone would pay 195 million rand. Obviously, this isn't necessarily investment property style for what we are trying to do, but it's crazy to see the type of properties being sold right under our noses. Most people will never in their lifetime see this amount of money. Never mind paying this amount for a property. It's quite insane to think of the type of money being moved in these areas. There's more than one listing above 100 million rand. And obviously, based just off the photos, it makes sense because this is like Tony Stark type of properties, and it's just scary to think that people actually buy these properties and live in these properties. So obviously these aren't necessarily the type of properties that you'll find in Bloemfontein, for example. So just looking at these properties it's insane. It's I think everyone would dream to live in a property of this size, and it's obviously very fancy. The reason I'm showing you this is, again, we just wanted to compare what is actually happening in these areas. So what I'll do next is I'll go to Bloemfontein, for example. This is where I live. I love Bloemfontein, and we'll do this exact same exercise. So the most expensive property you can buy in Bloemfontein now is a commercial property. If you know Bloemfontein, you'll know exactly where the center is. So you can effectively buy a 12,000 square meter shopping center for the same price you would pay for vacant land in Cape Town, for example. So this is 12,000 square meters. Again, if you know this area in Bloemfontein, there's a lot of shops. And that's the reason I wanted to do this, so that you can see what it is that you're actually paying for. Again, here's a place in a farm, basically a lodge, being sold for 75 million rand, and it's 2,300 hectare of land that you can buy. And the question that I always ask is, is it worth paying that premium amount for property in Cape Town compared to what you can get in other cities? And I mean, you can look at Joburg, for example, or Durban, or KwaZulu-Natal, or whatever it might be, and what you get more bang for your buck compared to a place like in Cape Town. Again, here's a entire commercial property in Bloemfontein. Oh, they don't show any photos. But most of them are actually commercial buildings. So let's quickly change and see if we choose the type of property and change it to a house. That would be quite interesting to see. Again, most of them should be investment properties. Here's a property in Waverley, for example. And this property is 6,600 square meters. If we look at the photos, it's obviously a very old house. It's not necessarily the best looking house, but I think there's a lot of potential, for example, in a property like this. Yeah, this is obviously very, very old properties, but it's insane to see that some of the most expensive properties in Bloemfontein is around 10 or 12, or let's say 15 or 20 million rand, compared to if we go back and search Cape Town or Western Cape and choose houses, and just change the order to see the difference between what is being sold in the different areas. And of course, it's a different target market. Bloemfontein won't necessarily attract foreign buyers, so it makes sense why people build in these areas. But this is obviously next level extreme. Most people will never be able to buy these properties, or most people will never want to buy these properties. And I think what we can do is, if we change the maximum price in Cape Town, for example, and let's say we make the limit 8 million rand. What is it that we can buy for 8 million rand in Western Cape? And here we can see 5-bedroom houses. Obviously, it depends on the area specifically. This is in Bel Air. Let's see Claremont, for example. What you can buy for 8 million rand compared to Bloemfontein, for example. If we change our maximum price again to 8 million, we're getting to the same type of, property vibe. So this property, for example, is 1,000 squares. The one in Cape Town is 700 squares, 5 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms. The one in Bloemfontein is 6 beds, 5 bathrooms. So still, it comes down to what you can get for what you pay, and places like Bloemfontein is going to be much higher because people are not buying these type of properties every day. I mean, for example, this property is already under offer, meaning it's been sold. And it takes a certain type of person in Bloemfontein to buy this property, for example, this is in Woodlands, so this is like a lifestyle estate, one of the better estates in Bloemfontein. So again, this is just browsing and checking out what is happening in Bloemfontein. But what I wanted to do is to see if I wanted to actually invest in a certain area, and I wanted to buy an investment property in the Western Cape, or let's say Cape Town, and let's say we are only able to qualify for a 2 million rand bond. I'm just going to change the property type to any, and we'll obviously have to make sure that the area that you buy this property in is a good area. But let's say, for example, Sea Point. I would probably consider buying a property in Sea Point. You'll be attracting foreigners or tourists, and this is obviously a very nice area. I've actually lived in one of these apartments before, or rented one of these apartments before. It's very small, and it's 26 square meters for a 1 bedroom. So you are paying 2 million rand for 26 square meters. So just to put this into perspective, for example, if we want to work out what are we paying per square meter, we'll take the purchase price and divide the square footage of 26. So you are paying 77,000 rand per square meter. So if you work out the size of a square meter, it's 1 meter by 1 meter. So for this, you're paying 77,000 rand in Cape Town or in Sea Point. And of course, Sea Point is a very expensive area. But let's do Bloemfontein again. And it's just so crazy to see the difference, or the price difference of these type of properties. Let's just change the maximum price to 2 million and let's see what pops up. And this is, let's look for something similar. Let's change it to a apartment. So the previous one we viewed was an apartment. And I'll search. And okay, these are complexes or townhouses. I'm just gonna select a flat. This is in Westdean. I would say this is a pretty decent area to buy as an investment property. Again, comparing Sea Point properties with Westdean in Bloemfontein, it's not necessarily the best comparison, but again, it's just an exercise that I'd like to do. And we'll do the same and use 1.1 million rand and divide the square footage of 135. That means per square meter for a property in Bloemfontein, you're paying 8,000 rand. So the question is, at the end of the day, is it worth paying so much more for that square meter in Cape Town because of this hype that everyone has about the properties, compared to what you can get, for example, in Bloemfontein? And I think, for example, an Airbnb in Bloemfontein will really not do well comparing it to an area like Sea Point. It's just not going to work. So your strategy will obviously be different. Your outlook will obviously be different. Your investment term will obviously be different. What I've seen happen so often is people buy property in Cape Town to get onto the bandwagon, because they are afraid of missing out of the increases in property prices in Cape Town. So I've heard stories of people saying they bought a property for 1.5 million rand a year ago, and now 6 months later it's worth 2.5 million rand. And I'm not really sure how accurate that is. I personally feel that it's speculating, and you can never, come or confidently say that a property's price will go up with a certain amount. But with a cash flow property strategy, for example, you can run the numbers and project how much cash flow your property will be generating. So it's a much safer bet. Same thing with your Airbnb strategy, for example. It's impossible to project accurately how much money you'll be able to receive in a given year. Obviously, every year might be different, especially if there's, certain things that happens in our economy or in different places. People will travel less or people will travel more. It's impossible to predict exactly how much money you will make. You can only work on averages. I would probably still buy property in Cape Town. I'm planning on doing that. It's obviously not going to be a cash flow strategy, and there will be some speculating involved. But I think at the end of the day, where you can really make money with property in Cape Town is long-term growth, and I'm talking about 10 to 15 years minimum, and equity. So if you can buy properties that has a lot of equity available, or older properties that you can renovate and add your touch on that property, you add value to that property above the appreciation that will happen on those properties. I think with Bloemfontein, for example, your properties really don't have that much appreciation. You're not going to see double-digit growth in 2 years on property in Bloemfontein, for example, unless you force your appreciation on these properties by doing renovations. And that's going to be a different strategy again. So, at the end of the day, I like the idea of owning property in Cape Town. Vacation rentals or even student accommodation, maybe in Stellenbosch or whatever it might be, or Western Cape. But you'll really have to decide whether it makes sense to buy property in Cape Town or not for your specific situation. Because if you can afford a property with a shortfall, or if you can afford to buy property every year that costs you a lot of money, but you have enough funds or a decent income to pay for that shortfall over the long term, it can make a lot of sense, and you can still make a lot of money doing that or following that strategy. And I think the cool thing about property is that you can use your own strategy at the end of the day. Some people will say you should only invest in cash flow, or some people will say you should only buy property in Cape Town, or whatever it might be. And at the end of the day, I feel that the reason I like property is because there's so many different ways that you can use property as an investment vehicle, and you'll have to figure out what will work for your specific situation. Most people won't necessarily like to buy property in Bloemfontein because it doesn't make sense for them. I do it because it works for me. It doesn't mean you'll have to do it. And just because some guy on TikTok says he makes thousands and thousands of rands with Airbnbs in Cape Town doesn't necessarily mean you'll have to jump into Cape Town property and follow the trend. You'll have to figure out, is it worth it? Does it make sense to buy property in these areas? Is it actually worth paying the premium on properties in Cape Town for a specific strategy? And again, if you wanted to focus on appreciation and equity, I think property in Cape Town is a great option, and especially if you are someone that earns different currency, and you want to invest in South Africa without stressing about depreciation or issues with the government. Cape Town is the best place to do this. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's cool to see the different type of properties. And I mean, this is obviously just a couple of minutes that we looked at the property available. And if we have a look the other way around and we'll check the lowest property prices, for example, in Cape Town, you can buy some sketchy places. Obviously, you won't do this. These are obviously rural areas. The same with Bloemfontein. If we check low to high, this is actually a property, Bloemfontein Central, for example. I know this place. I won't necessarily buy a property there, but it's still a decent property. You're going to pay 310,000 Rand for it. It has risk, absolutely. But look what you can buy for almost the same price in Cape Town. It's literally basically just the land that you are paying for in this example. Just have a look at a different one. This, for example, Willows, this is a student area, very small apartment. But again, it's something that can potentially make money for you and generate cash flow. So let me know down in the comments what you think about the Cape Town property market. Is it worth spending the extra money to buy property in Cape Town? I would say it can be. It is definitely something that makes sense. Not necessarily for most people. I always say that I wouldn't necessarily move to Cape Town unless I'm already very wealthy. I don't think it's the best place to go and create wealth. Especially for first generation millionaires or whatever. I think there's a lot of old money in Cape Town, but again, there's a lot of old money in Bloemfontein as well. Some people will be shocked about the amount of money being moved in the small Bloemfontein economy, and I think there's some of the richest people in South Africa actually live in Bloemfontein, and that's quite scary to think of it. But it's a different lifestyle, and people are not as flashy with their money compared to in Cape Town. For example, big business owners, multi-billion rand business owners driving a Toyota Land Cruiser, for example, with investors or entrepreneurs or business owners in Cape Town. They just have a different lifestyle, and they drive different cars, and yeah, it's quite interesting. So you'll have to pick your poison, or pick the area that would work for you. Yeah, let me know what you think about these type of videos. Is this something that you would like to see more of? Yeah,